Hi, my name is John Petty, and I want to welcome you to my first episode of Growing Up in Flip Flops. Here at Growing Up in Flip Flops, I want to tell you some stories about a young boy growing up in 1960s Southwest Florida. Some of the stories I'm going to tell you are funny, some of them are maybe a little bit sad, but that's basically what life's about for all of us. It's just going to be relating short stories of what I experienced. And I think what hopefully a lot of you have experienced as well. And if not, I want you to at least be able to share some of those experiences. I'm going to start off with our first episode today with a story about Mr. Alexander. My mother believed in routine in both faith and function. She was a Methodist on both Sunday morning and throughout the rest of the week. She truly did not leave the principle of repetition behind at noon on Sunday, but extended it into how she approached every day. Monday through Friday was easy enough for my sister and I. School, homework, dinner, help my sister clean the kitchen and dishes, and then an hour of television, and then on to bed. And start again the next day. Saturday, however, had its own schedule. First came my assigned cleaning chores around the house, which included sweeping the front porch and walk and mopping the kitchen and bathroom floors. And then came the highlight of my week, as if anything couldn't surpass school, homework, sweeping, or mopping for an 8-year-old boy. That highlight was accompanying my mother on a trip to the grocery store for her weekly shopping. It wasn't the shopping itself or even getting out of the house that was so special, but rather the experience I was able to enjoy every week on the sidewalk in front of the grocery store. That experience was Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander was a white-haired black gentleman. I have no idea of his first name or anything else about him, but I did know every Saturday he would be seated outside the grocery, seated on a concrete bench in the shade of the store's awning and surrounded by a dozen or so children. I assumed that every boy or girl seated on the bench or sidewalk had been left in Mr. Alexander's care by his or her mother, as mine had, while they shopped in the store. What was it that made sitting on the sidewalk the highlight of my week? Mr. Alexander told us stories. These stories were about anything and everything, from kings and knights and princesses to the Spanish-American War and everything in between. I can't remember a time I wasn't enthralled by him. I heard adventure, romance, and stories of faraway lands. I heard stories of good and evil and of human triumph and tragedy and bravery and fear and greed and charity. The stories took ups and downs, twists and turns, all through the power of Mr. Alexander's voice and gestures. Sights and sounds of street traffic, shopping carts, and people walking along the sidewalk were non-existent to me. Occasionally, a mother would appear at the door and call a name, and invariably a child, upon hearing their name, would protest being called away in the middle of the story. Mr. Alexander's response was always the same to the protests, even though they weren't directed at him. His gentle direction to the child was always, "Mind your mother now. I'll be here next Saturday." That would be the only break from the story, and if your name hadn't been called, the interchange had no effect on the spell of the storytelling than if Mr. Alexander had simply taken a breath. On a hot Saturday morning, this small group of ever-changing children would be taken to another world, and all while sitting in front of a small-town grocery store. We were in medieval Europe or the jungles of South America. It didn't matter that I had been mopping our kitchen or in a car with my mother half an hour earlier. I was now with Mr. Alexander, telling me of something or somewhere I had never imagined. Did anyone ever question Mr. Alexander if he'd actually ever seen any of these places? Never. It didn't matter, because he was able to make each story as real as if it was happening at that moment. My life was anything but predictable and routine during my visits with Mr. Alexander. You never knew where you were going to go or what famous person you were going to meet on those mornings with Mr. Alexander. And that's what made Saturday so special. I was introduced to people and lands I would only in later years learn of more fully or be able to visit. Better than any movie or television show, it was as if I had lived every story he told to that small group of children. To this day, I wonder if any of those mothers ever realized what marvelous journeys their children had taken in front of a grocery store with an elderly man named Mr. Alexander. But I certainly do, as I had my chance to depart from a life of routine every Saturday morning. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back next week for another story. Thank you again.